Newcastle United had a £25 million bid rejected for Brentford striker Yoane Wissa yesterday, but plan to go back in with a second offer and there's cautious optimism that a deal can be struck. We'll be analysing that situation and also discussing more on Alexander Isak's future as a potential contract demand has been set. It's NUFC Transfer Daily, let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we get going, please do hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up on this video. Join the community. It's growing at a really rapid rate and there's so much more content to come across the summer and going into the start of the new season as well. We've got some concrete news to talk about as Newcastle have finally made that move for Brentford striker Yoane Wissa, as I said in the intro, and also Alexander Isak is still very much in the headlines, even though I think the story is not moving on in the way that Liverpool fans want it to, and I will discuss all of that in today's episode. But we'll start, as I say, with Yoane Wissa, Newcastle making that £25 million bid, which has been met with, I would say, a negative reaction on a number of ways by Newcastle fans. I think most people are kind of viewing it as maybe an undercut value because that's what Nottingham Forest bid in January and that was rejected by Brentford. Brentford fans have said that it's quite an insulting offer and Newcastle should really not be part of negotiations with Forest, and also Tottenham still very much in the picture as well. And Newcastle fans, I think, generally have kind of not really got excited about it because they don't want to be burned again. This is really the sixth sort of target Newcastle have gone for, and they've seen the other players reject them for similar reasons that could be possible for Wissa. I mean, the opportunity to go to Spurs would surely entice him because they're also in the Champions League. It's staying in London and also working with Thomas Frank. I think that's why Newcastle fans are not particularly excited. Some fans are questioning his age and some fans are questioning the merits of going for a player like him as well. But and obviously I know some people have said those things in the comments section, but for me, this is a sensible deal if it can get done at the right price. I've always said that, and I'll explain again why in the context of what has happened in the last 24 hours regarding this. The bid was rejected out of hand, but also, crucially, negotiations continue. And as I've explained in previous videos, bids are very fluid. They don't sit round tables and have it as formal as it sounds in the media or maybe looks from the outside. They're very fluid conversations that continue, and Newcastle's opening gambit was the same as Nottingham Forest. They probably expected that to be rejected, but what they're doing, I think, is trying to set their stall out to say that, you know, there's been reports that Brentford want £50 million, and the fact that Wissa has a year in his contract, there is an option on a second year, but they're not in a position really to demand that. And I think Newcastle have tried to force the issue and tried to make it clear that 25 million is not the bid that they expect to be accepted, but it sets the sort of realm of where Newcastle are trying to get the deal done. I would expect it to be around 30, maybe 35 at a push. But I don't think it will go that far. I think the fact that Yoane Wissa, according to Sammy Mokbel at BBC Sport, has left their camp, Brentford's camp in Portugal, to have talks with Phil Giles over a move, I think this really sets the stall out, and Brentford don't have the power stance that they necessarily thought that they had or want to have after selling Bryan Mbeumo. Wissa is forcing the issue a lot more than Mbeumo is, even though Mbeumo's gone to Manchester United. It doesn't feel like this is something that Newcastle can't achieve, and it would be very difficult for Brentford, you can imagine, to survive this season because obviously they've lost Thomas Frank, they've lost Christian Norgard, Bryan Mbeumo and Yoane Wissa. That is really the spine, and Mark Flecken as well. That's the spine of the club and the team. They've really got to react to that. It's difficult to do that. But Newcastle will be getting a player who scored 31 goals in the last two seasons in the Premier League, 12 one year, 19 the next, and can play across the front three, is experienced, wouldn't necessarily, I think this is the crucial point, kick up a fuss around Alexander Isak, and doesn't take that much out of the budget. If the deal is to be done, as I say, it may not be 25 million, and I can understand the Brentford fans being frustrated with the size of that offer, considering Nottingham Forest have also bid that in January and it was also rejected out of hand. Spurs can come into the conversation, and we've seen with Liverpool, with Ekitike and João Pedro and Chelsea, that when a more attractive option makes their move, the player can quickly switch up and decide to go in another direction. And I think we all have to accept that Tottenham is, from a Wissa perspective, quite an attractive option because Thomas Frank is there and Spurs are in the Champions League, and it means staying in London. All of those things are factors, but he seems keen on the move, and it seems like a really good fit for a number of reasons. As I said yesterday, I think Newcastle should go and find a younger option that's longer term. I think that that's absolutely fair, but at the same time, £30 million is a lot cheaper. There is a caveat to that I will touch on in a second, but also the fact that he's Premier League proven. I've railed against this all summer, but Newcastle do value it, and it has become, and I think the Premier League values it. I think there's a discussion to be had over the validation of other leagues now compared to the Premier League in a PSR world where no transfer can really fail. Premier League proven becomes a commodity that's worth its weight in gold. I disagree with that, but that just seems to be the way it's going, so that has to be viewed as a factor for the Wissa transfer. I think the fact that he's slightly older, the opportunity to play in the Champions League is not something he'll take for granted. He'll happily come in and sit and challenge Alexander Isak, and look at the depth that he would bring of versatility and quality in the attacking third. You have Isak, Wissa, Gordon, Barnes, Elanga, Sula and Murphy up front for three positions. That's really good depth. That's the sort of depth we'd love to see across the squad, which hasn't really been the case. They still need a centre-back, goalkeeper still a situation, and obviously midfield as well, we've discussed too. But Wissa being 28 isn't an issue for me in itself. I think modern football has changed the way that these things are viewed. It used to be that 28 was the peak of a player. 28, 29 would be when the player would make the final move and the big move and get the opportunity, having developed at a smaller club. But 28 is not old. He's still 4 years pretty much, because he's turning 29 in September. Younger than Callum Wilson. The valuation compared to someone like Ekitike or Samu, who we discussed yesterday, even Moise Kean, £30 million, if that could be done, would be a fantastic deal, and something that I think would just solve a problem instantly and solve a problem for a couple of years. There is a caveat, as I said earlier, and the caveat is that PSR situation, it depends what Newcastle do with the contract, because if he's 28, is it sensible to give them a 5-year contract to spread the cost to help with PSR, or does he get a shorter contract, which would then basically make him very similar to the cost of a £50 million player? I really think that that's an interesting conundrum that Newcastle have to face. But just on the merits of Yoane Wissa, 31 goals in 69 Premier League games over the last 2 years. For context, Ollie Watkins, who's a year older, double the price. Aston Villa rejected a £60 million bid from Arsenal in January. He's got 35 goals in 75 games over the last 2 seasons. So that shows you that actually, Vissa's record and the fact that he is playing at a similar level to somebody like Watkins, who's also on the list that Newcastle have looked at and been discussed, by the way, it really sort of shows that he is a serious player and he deserves his opportunity. That last season wasn't a fluke. He's had 2 very good seasons, 7 in the first 2 seasons each, but he's still impressed. He's still very much showed that how good he is, and I think he's ready to make this move. He fits the bill. It solves a problem. For me, that makes a lot of sense. They still have to get the deal done. As I said earlier, this has been met by a lot of nerves and questions, because the whole situation with Wissa reminds people of João Pedro and Ekitike, and Newcastle fans have been incredibly scarred by the window. I think lots of other fans are mocking Newcastle as well, and all of the momentum that they built at the end of the season in qualifying for the Champions League. After the Everton game, we were really excited about what this summer had in store. It was seen as transformational. They'd been through a difficult year with the previous window, obviously the PSR situation, not signing anybody. They'd got through that season in a brilliant way, and there was a real chance to kick on. All of that's dried up now. All that excitement has gone away. Paul Mitchell's left. There's a power vacuum at the top of the club. They need some positivity. They need another deal to get over the line that I think would improve the squad. And I think the crucial thing is Newcastle don't necessarily need, as much as I'd like them to, and as much as I've given plenty of options of players out there who could do these jobs, if they keep the likes of Tonali, Isak, Bruno, Botman and Gordon, those real star quality players, building a squad of good proven Premier League players who come in and improve the team immediately. In the case of Anthony Elanga, grow with the team. He's only 23, but instantly make the squad better. I think that makes a lot of sense for a Champions League campaign. It allows more money to go and spend on a centre-back as well, which would be next in line than, say, Ekitike, which would have blown most of the budget out of the water, and obviously other options on the list would do the same thing. Sesko, Samu, various others. Wissa gives Newcastle an immediate upgrade and an opportunity to go and spend elsewhere, but we'll talk more about how Wissa would fit into the squad if and when the deal gets closer. By the time you're watching this, Newcastle may well have made a second bid because it feels like it's accelerating. The fact that he's left the camp in Portugal with Brentford suggests that Wissa is keen on the move and pushing, because Newcastle are the only club who's made their move so far. I know Forest did bid earlier in the summer, but I think Newcastle have got more of an opportunity than Forest because of the Champions League. Spurs are the big worry, I think, from a Newcastle perspective, because they have Champions League football, but crucially Thomas Frank being there, his former boss at Brentford, would be a great opportunity for him to reunite. So if Spurs make a move, then we'll see what Newcastle have in the tank. But there is cautious optimism that this deal will be done. Let me know in the comment section what you think. I feel like it's a good deal for the various different reasons I did outline. It would be interesting to see what Newcastle did from a PSR perspective, because if you give him a 3-year contract, he suddenly becomes a player that is valued like a £50 million player, which doesn't really help Newcastle in any way. So maybe it's worth giving him a longer contract and spreading the deal to help with PSR, but you then have him tied to the club when he's 33, 34, and perhaps that isn't ideal in the same way that Callum Wilson was around. But let me know what you think. It'll be interesting to see where Newcastle go from here. If Newcastle have made a second bid, I think this deal gets done for no more than £35 million. If it costs more than that, again, caveating that with what other clubs do, then I think Newcastle would step off and go for another player, which would be very frustrating because they've lost out on so many targets already. There's a lot of appetite just to get this deal done and solve the striker situation for the season. I know that the Isak stuff is going on in the background as well, but Wissa would be an ideal. He fits the bill as an immediate second striker to Isak, I think, more than anybody else. There's no question about where he'd fit in tactically. There's no question about what his motivation would be. It feels like a good fit. Let me know in the comment section what you think. And we're also going to talk about Alexander Isak as well. I really don't like doing this too much, but there's so much noise around him, and it wasn't helped by the picture that emerged of people suggesting that he was training alone yesterday. I think I would warn against that whole thing. I don't have any insight on this. I don't know. I saw there was a report that he was injured and that was why he was training alone. I don't have any insight on that. But I would just warn against seeing pictures on social media. And the caption on that picture, by the way, the fan who took it, suggested that he was off to Liverpool, which I don't think really helped the narrative. It was picked up by the media. It was picked up by the Liverpool fans. Again, similar to what I was saying about Eddie Howe. Newcastle haven't helped, whether it's the fans or the club, in the last week themselves with the narrative, and I think it feels like Newcastle are a little bit out of control here, and that isn't a good sign. The facts are Newcastle are taking it easy with him this summer because of that difficult run-in he had with his groin problem last year, so it makes sense for him to train alone. Maybe it was an extra session, but I would just urge caution on that picture because it doesn't actually say anything. It doesn't actually benefit anybody other than Liverpool fans who again get to create that storm. Isak is pushing for the move, when actually I think if Isak was to push for the move, he would have done it last Monday when that bid came in, or Tuesday, whenever it was, and Newcastle had that bid for Ekitike on the table, which would have made sense from Newcastle's perspective. In the worst case scenario, if you were ever going to sell Isak last summer, that was the time to do it. If you do it now, we've spoken so many times, you have to then go and find another striker and solve that problem all over again. So it doesn't make sense. I think if Isak was to have really kicked up a fuss, we'd have heard about it by now. He's expected to be on the plane to Asia in the next couple of days, so don't worry. The other thing to discuss about Isak is his £300,000 a week report that came from TalkSport of his demands for a new contract, and that was out of Newcastle's price range, which again pushed the narrative that Liverpool fans wanted, that that Newcastle are in a weak position. But there's negotiation to be had. Newcastle can go fairly high. I think they can go probably just above £200,000 a week. 300,000, you're probably looking at a potential breach of PSR, but there's lots of things that they can do, lots of discussions among fan base. Should Newcastle look at getting somebody else out the door? I mean, Matt Target's on £100,000 a week. You could get rid of him and put the money towards Isak's contract, for example. Kieran Trippier has been discussed in similar terms. Those things are things Newcastle can do, and there's definitely middle ground to be had. on that conversation. In terms of, does Isak deserve £300,000 a week? Absolutely he does. I mean, Newcastle fans and Newcastle as a club have loved pushing the narrative that he's one of, if not the best striker in the world at the moment, and he deserves to be paid like that. This is why I'm not too worried by Eddie Howe's comment about it being a short career, because if you're Isak and you're Isak's people and you've got the quality that he has, you should be, as I said in previous videos, you should be not just playing in the Champions League, you should be challenging to win it. You should be earning £300,000 a week. He deserves a big move if Newcastle can't offer him those things at some point in the future. But Newcastle have to do what they can do to keep him happy until they're in a position where they can react. And I think at the moment, if they sold him, it would be a complete disaster off the back of the optics of the summer, the fact that the club has got such a power vacuum at the top of the club, as we mentioned, and the fact that they will then have to go and replace him, that is so difficult to do. So keep him at least for a year, give him a new contract that reflects that as best as you can, and then prepare for a sale. The one thing I would say is that I don't think £300,000 is a deal breaker. I think you would probably be able to talk him down to a deal that Newcastle could afford, but it may impact the number. I would imagine the direct consequence of that would be a lower release clause and an ability to make it easier for him to leave next summer. Newcastle need it to be at least £120 million, I would suggest, and ideally for foreign clubs. But I don't necessarily think that this is too much of an issue. I think that they can get some negotiation on this and sort something out from this stage, but obviously there's a long way to go. I don't think Isak's going to sign a new contract over the summer because all this talk and all this speculation benefits him and his camp in terms of the deal that he can get. I would imagine if he signs a new contract, it'll be similarly to when Gordon and Bruno signed theirs, which is around September, October, as mentioned previously. So yeah, I think that the Isak situation, I would not be too concerned by the training alone. There's so many reasons why that happens. It's also very hard to decipher just from the photo that he was training alone. Don't be too concerned by that. The wage demands, you've got to be respectful to Isak. He deserves to be earning around that money, and he will earn around that money at some stage in the future, I'm sure, when he gets a move, because he's already outgrowing Newcastle. If he can't earn and achieve what he dreams of at Newcastle, there's got to be a point in the future that he leaves. It just can't be this summer, and I really don't think it will be this summer. My thought is that he'll sign a new contract at around £200,000, maybe a little bit more this summer, with a release clause that is probably a little bit lower than Newcastle would like, but that's the sort of trade-off you've got to get for these things, because Isak's in a position of power. Even though Newcastle is still in control, that power shift will only go in Isak's direction as well. Thanks so much for joining me on today's video. Like, share and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with more stuff. Hopefully the Yoane Wissa situation's pushed on in a positive way by then, and there's much more stuff for us to talk about as well. Like, share and subscribe, and I'll be back tomorrow. Cheers.